Hello and welcome to the Ahead of the Game podcast. I'm your host, James Oxford, and today I have Pete Toal and Mathew Miller joining me to talk about the Philadelphia 76ers. Before we dive in, I'm going to ask you, the listeners, for a huge favor. Go ahead and click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you're feeling generous, share it on social media. So, the 76ers perhaps had a more eventful offseason than some may have expected. There's quite a bit of roster turnover, including them being able to bring in Paul George to give them perhaps a three-headed monster on offense with Embiid, Maxey, and George. So my first question is pretty simple. Does Paul George push the 76ers into the top spot in the East, or are the Celtics still the favorites as the reigning champs? Pete, what are you thinking?
All right, I am a diehard 76ers fan since 89, 90 when I started watching the NBA. I'm also realistic that the Sixers made a great move in getting Paul George. I don't think that elevates them to the top spot, though. I do think it's going to work out well for them because if you look at Paul George's fit, he is versatile enough as a shot maker in the 97th percentile in pull ups and catch and shoot efficiency that he can play off of Embiid and Maxey. Maxey can obviously play off the ball if Paul George wants to kind of bring it up a little bit in the pick and roll as well. Paul George had the highest true shooting percentage of his career at 61% last year as well. Did, like I said, play ball handler and pick and roll situations. He was fourth overall in NBA small forwards in efficiency in that role. The only downside to the Paul George acquisition is now you got two superstars that potentially miss games in Embiid and Paul George because Paul George missed an average of 26 games over his last four seasons. Now, obviously, a myriad of injuries happened to Paul George, just like they seem to happen to Embiid when it comes to the playoffs. But the hope is with Maxey and Paul George kind of both splitting the secondary role, 1B, 2A kind of sort of to Embiid, that's going to be enough versatility to kind of give different looks on a nightly basis for the Sixers to kind of elevate past last year. And we also know that Nick Nurse is the king of changing up different schemes on offense. So that should help a lot there. Bringing back Kelly Oubre, this time he's going to play the starting shooting guard role. We'll see. I do think they need an extra defender kind of there because it seems like they kind of went all offense and not really much on the defensive end. So I don't know how much that's going to help or hurt. But I do love the Paul George move.
Matt, where is your head at regarding the
I
76ers in
don't
the
think I don't
East?
yeah, I don't think they'll be number one. That's still I think right now, just on paper and health, we're assuming I'm gonna assume health as we have to right now. I think the Celtics and the Knicks are probably the top two right now. But then in that three, I mean, then you've got what, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, the Magic, the Cavs, the Pacers. Like any one of those teams could finish third, and obviously health and all that. And I do like the fit of Paul George. Like as Pete was saying, him and Maxey can both create with the ball. They can both play off the ball and stuff. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. They're not going to clash or anything like that. And I think it actually probably will help Embiid as well, bringing in Paul George. And then, so with who's going to be who now is the three, the four, and all that stuff. How are they going
So
to determine the rest of the starting lineup?
so Kelly Oubre's the two, Paul George plays the three,
the three, yeah, and then the
Caleb
four.
Martin plays the four,
Mm.
and then you got obviously
Oh,
Embiid at
yes.
center.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
the
So
issue you've got is there's nothing behind Caleb Martin at the four, like nothing,
Mm-hmm.
because they had to let go of Paul Reed in order to gain Caleb Martin.
Covington.
Yeah. So my three fits are Covington, Bertans as a shooter, and then Marcus Morris as a like kind of as a fill gap in there.
Now,
But
I did really like the Martin addition. I thought that was, like you said, they were adding a lot of offense. Martin can bring some offense, obviously, with the shooting, but defensively is really where you're bringing him on the court for. And Paul George, I think maybe they could play some small ball forward with him there. I think they may be forced to at this point, just given the roster limitations if there's no more additions. The depth obviously is a problem for them. I think what could allow them to play some small ball a little more reliably is that while I'm not a huge fan of Drummond as an impact player totally, he does dominate the defensive boards, which is obviously a concern when you're going small. Can we end the other team's possessions with the defensive rebound? That's something Drummond can do. So they do maybe have the flexibility, I think, to try to play small sometimes with Drummond at the center. And obviously Embiid could be the lone big as well. No doubt about that. Where I see the depth on their bench is obviously they have uh, Reggie Jackson, Kyle Lowry, both as and Eric Gordon, all as small guards off the bench. Tyrese Maxey also not a huge guard off the bench. So you wonder how much overlap maybe could there be between Maxey playing with some of these other guards. There's going to be some. Clearly, they didn't bring these guys in to not play them, but I think that is a potential issue as well.
And you got inexperience kind of on the wing because Ricky Council is kind of your wing. KJ Martin, although he has experience, not a lot of, really late game experience. It's always been in garbage time, things like that. It's not a versatile shooter, so you kind of have to play him as a four.
I would definitely argue that the only time KJ Martin's been productive is in those garbage time minutes. For the Rockets, he looked solid, but then you realize, hey, they're not actually winning games right now. So what he's doing right now is like Jalen Green looking solid for the Rockets. They're not actually winning games, giving these guys touches, having these guys involved in defensive actions.
Kind of fool's gold when you see it.
Yeah, exactly. You put it in a winning situation. Oh wait, actually, this doesn't really work. So I'm definitely concerned about KJ Martin. Although if he does pan out, which I hope he does, he's actually super aesthetically pleasing to watch. He has those crazy help side blocks occasionally. He has the posters. It's just, is the stuff in between that there? Does he have the awareness, the defensive awareness to make those extra plays? That's the kind of concerns you have, I think, with him. McCain is another guy they just added to the roster out of the draft. I'm not super sold on him being ready immediately. I think he's got a promising future, but right now I think he's probably would be better off seeing some G League minutes, at least just to get some reps, some confidence.
And that's likely because of Nick Nurse not really playing rookies a ton anyway. That and he played more off the ball at Duke. He can play on the ball and kind of bring it up a little bit, but they're going to kind of groom him to be a point guard. But you've already got Reggie Jackson, who we know he's never shied away from shooting the ball. You've got Kyle Lowry, who's a little bit older, who Nick Nurse does trust. Obviously was in Philly last year. Eric Gordon can kind of slide up or down if needed. So there's really not a ton of minutes there for McCain, and I'm okay with that. Develop him at a slower rate. Let him kind of fill in a small rotation role next year, but not this year. The biggest guys are going to be Gordon, Drummond, those two for sure, and then Lowry or Jackson, depending on which route you want to go. And then they got to figure out how they're going to fit in KJ Martin or something, or Ricky Council as a little bit of size at the forward spot off the bench. They'll have to mix and match throughout. So we'll see what happens there. But I think KJ Martin ultimately will be dealt at the deadline for a different player. And that's why they signed him to the contract they did, because it's such a tradable asset in order to get ready for the playoffs.
Now, before we move on to more regular season talk, one other addition I want to talk about could end up being nothing, but I thought it was just a smart gamble for them to take Justin Edwards. Obviously, very highly recruited out of high school. Didn't look as well as or as good as people thought at Kentucky he was going to, but man, what a smart gamble to take. Because I mean, what's the downside?
In a way, like you get I kind of like thinking of it this way: guy highly recruited in high school, college. Like obviously, it's not going to be the same case because Derek Lively is awesome and he went lottery, but it could be a situation like that where it didn't quite work out at Kentucky. Like Lively was, when you look at his numbers at Duke, he wasn't great, but he gets a chance. He's probably not going to get much of a chance. Get him in the G League. We'll see. But I kind of look at the Lively situation in that, like a guy not highly recruited because, for Lively injuries and stuff, and he ends up being awesome. Now, I'm not saying he'll be that because he's not going to get the kind of minutes like Lively did.
Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pete. Just the role with Calipari, you can't always judge Kentucky players just because they fit a certain criteria that Calipari wants. And once they hit the league, they show different parts. There's been a few flops, the Harrison twins, among others, that
Who
that
started
didn't
over
really
Devin
translate.
Booker.
Yeah. So, and, yes, and you have it the other way where, like you said, with Booker, they shine. And so we'll see. But knowing Nick Nurse, I don't know that he plays a ton enough to make a difference, unfortunately.
Right. Certainly not immediately, but down the line, just good gamble to take, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, Paul George, you add him because you think he can make a difference in some playoff series, right? I mean, if not, then what's the point of spending the extra money? Because Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid obviously can get you to a certain extent to the playoffs, second round, right? So what team do you think Paul George helps the 76ers the most against in the playoffs?
Ooh.
Wow. I mean, that just depends where they fall in the
Mm-hmm.
seedings. I mean, I think you're easily going to be able to beat a Cleveland if it's a 4-5 matchup or a 3-6 matchup, depending. Um, the better question, I guess, for me would be, can they beat a team like a Boston that can switch so many guys? And that's where it gets so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Embiid is so vital to it. But as far as Paul George, I think you could pretty much beat every other team realistically, other than Boston, even New York, because as versatile as New York is with defenders, they don't have size. So it really is going to come down to match up for them. I think ultimately with both Paul George and with Embiid, you have to look at the regular season. Embiid played 39 games last year, obviously hurt. You want him ready for the playoffs. So during stretches of the season, do you give him rest? Do you give Paul George some rest? So that way they make sure they get over the hump of the first round. They're in that second round, whoever it is against, and they're competitive, because the one knock, is, no conference finals, and Embiid starts getting, you know, back and forth in the media and gets kind of cranky and throws blame, and they're going to start Daryl Morey. We know he's the king of changes too. So, they basically have to get a lot out of Paul George. Playoff P, as he likes to quote himself as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a trade to make during the regular season to shore up the depth at the big spot so they can get Joel Embiid that rest? Because Paul George, they can probably find, the bodies to get him rest. Embiid is like Drummond is Drummond's starting now. Who's their backup center in those games? Adembona, I guess that's the next name on the
Mm-hmm.
list. I don't feel super
No.
confident in winning games with him getting heavy minutes at this point. So, is there a trade to make? Do they have to move Council, who I haven't seen enough of him to really have a big opinion on him in the NBA. So maybe Pete, you can tell me kind of where your thoughts are as far as Ricky. Is he maybe a piece they could use to go get a backup big instead?
I think they like Council enough, but I mean, if you got to throw him in, if he's kind of the piece that makes it work along with KJ Martin and say a
Hmm.
second round pick, and you go get a backup stretch four that can really stretch the floor with size, versatile enough to defend, you have to do it. We've seen that Daryl Morey is more than willing to spend in various situations. I just worry that Daryl Morey likes his select guys that he has on his little, pen and paper, and looks at the analytics of sometimes too hard rather than looking at the eye test. That's what I worry about. But don't forget, we also have the buyout market for some of
Hmm.
these, veterans that may not have a role early in the season, that the Sixers can get a little bit cheaper. That's kind of what you have to look at overall. Trade KJ Martin, maybe Ricky Council, then look at the buyout market second. I don't think there's going to be any need for big trades barring a major injury for the Sixers. So I think that would be a good way to go.
Right.
Mhm.
Totally makes sense.
Is there like a guy like that you would go for? Like would a guy like I don't know if the Hawks would do it, but like Larry Nance maybe, a guy who can defend, shoot from
Hmm.
the outside, does have injury problems himself though.
I like Larry Nance. I would look more for versatility that could either play the four as a stretch role and a small ball five role, or the other way where you could play him as a stretch four into a hybrid wing role if needed. One of those two.
Okay.
I'm a huge Dorian Finney-Smith guy, so I'm going to bring him up,
I
in the
like
sense
him.
that
Yes.
Yeah, he's great.
he can play and he doesn't need a ton of touches to do it. It sounds funny, but Georges Niang on Cleveland, bring him back in a role as a shooter.
Bang,
That's
bang,
another stretch guy.
Niang.
Yes. I mean, there's different guys across the league. Dallas, I like Maxi Kleba as a backup 4 or 5. That's another
big, right? That's the guy right there.
Another role to
Hey,
go.
Council and KJ Martin may be somewhat enticing for them, just more depth on the wing for the Mavericks.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, it really gets down to, again, the Celtics, because they're the big bad in the East right now. I think that it's tough to just look at their roster and pick holes. Like, you could say, oh, well, we can attack this point because, I mean, their roster is solid, right? There's no obvious holes. They just proved that. How many games did they lose in the postseason? Was it 3 total?
They lost. Let's see. They lost 1 to the Hawks, I think. They lost 1 to Miami. They lost 1 to Dallas. Yeah, I think it was 3.
So 3 games.
They swept Indiana.
That's just juggernaut type performance. I mean, we don't often see teams go 16-3 in the playoffs. So it definitely is. Celtics are on top. Embiid against the Celtics, like, is what is the game plan? Are we just attacking Kristaps? Are we working for switches? Because the Celtics obviously are a team that's open to switches, but I think that they also have Mazzulla, who is smart enough to throw smart double teams and make Embiid work for those assists through the double team. Something to think about, I think.
It's going to be tough because, like you said, Kristaps does have the length, obviously, to disrupt Embiid, but I think it's Horford that would guard Embiid ultimately in a post-up situation. Then it becomes, if Kristaps switch off to whoever's at the 4, you got Caleb Martin being able to hit him on back cuts all day long.
True.
Because he's not going to be able to stay with the speed of Caleb Martin. I do worry about where Paul George's effectiveness comes if it's Jaylen Brown guarding him in a one-on-one situation. How much separation can he get from Jaylen Brown? But also the flip side, he'll be able to guard a Jaylen Brown or a Jason Tatum and kind of really be effective against one of those two. It's just a matter of, can Caleb Martin be effective on the other one and getting stops? Then it comes down to Tyrese Maxey, and can the game slow down on offense for you enough that you can be effective and not just basically 1-4 flat. You take it down the court and zoom by, because you're not going to get by Derek White and Drew Holiday every single time that way. So that's tough. But then you look at the other wing and Kelly Oubre. Can you make smart enough basketball plays to be effective? Because we know Kelly Oubre can score and really, really put the ball in the basket. But so many lapses with him so many times on defense, and then offense, he just takes a lot of questionable shots. So he has to be effective. It all has to work well to be able to get past Boston. That's my worry. But for me, if they got to the conference finals and it was Boston and they lost, I'd be sad, but I know it's Boston. Now, if we lose in the first round again, then all hell's going to break loose.
When you're going against, and plus, I mean, in fairness, just like Philadelphia has to worry about injuries, is KP going to be healthy? Like, he's kind of like, and if they don't have him, like, if he can't play in the playoffs due to an injury, they're beatable. They're very beatable at that point.
They're beatable, but obviously they can win without him too. They just showed that, right?
Also, in fairness too, Drew Holiday is not getting younger. He's eventually, you're going to start to see him decline at some point. It's just, you can't, Charles Barkley says it all. Can't be Father Time. It's undefeated.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Derek White, I think, is a guy that I don't think he slept on anymore. But man, a couple of years ago, were people sleeping on him? And I think he's just going to pick up any slack that Drew Holiday gives, because I don't think we've actually seen the extent of him as a player.
Yeah, did he kind of have like a down shooting year or two with the Spurs, and then that's when kind of people looked at it like,
Right.
maybe he's not as good as we thought because he wasn't shooting the ball well.
Right, right. But I mean, people sleep on how much variance is in shooting. A whole
Yes,
season can be a slump for a guy, and people think, oh,
yes,
well, he can't shoot now. No, legitimately, like shooting is so volatile. You could have a whole season where it's a slump. You could also have a whole season, which the Mavericks are hoping is not the case for Najee Marshall, where you look like a
yes,
shooter and then now you're not a shooter again.
yes.
And that's why it's so hard to project things like shooting. You're looking at free throw percentage to try to get a better idea. You're looking at volume, which again, I don't want to hate on Najee Marshall because I do like him as a player, but the lack of volume there may make the Mavericks a little bit cautious about where he's at. So it is interesting as far as what should we expect from guys from season to season shooting wise. Derek White, uh, I think he's a guy at this point where even if he shoots in the like 33, 34, he's probably still like a dynamite player, the impact he's making. Not everyone is obviously that caliber of player.
Mhm.
Correct.
Back to the Sixers though, is there any other kind of points y'all wanted to touch on? I think we touched on a lot of things. I guess you could say salary cap. There's not a lot of wiggle room next summer with Embiid on the books for 55, Paul George for 52 or 51 and a half, and Tyrese for 40. I mean, right there, you're already at the salary cap, I think.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, right now it's basically looking at, like I said, Daryl Morey kind of put together some guys he's familiar with. Andre Drummond coming back. He was there in the 21-22 season. Um, he's familiar obviously with Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon's one of his biggest supporters. You go and get uh, Reggie Jackson, who if it works out well, and he may win you a game or two, but he also could take you out of a game or two. So it's, we'll see. It's not the end of the world. I think they did as much as they could in order to slot in Paul George, which is the main goal.
And
Once it
no
was
more
known,
Tobias Harris.
yeah, well, yes, and I mean Tobias was expiring, so I mean we knew it just wasn't going to work. A lot of the fans turned on him, and he just didn't seem happy either. But I mean, it's an upgrade across the board. Now it's just health because Embiid missing, basically what 43 games for the season. The Sixers still won 47 despite him missing 43 games. Now you get Paul George in there who you're upgrading from Tobias Harris. So if Tobias Harris can help win you 47 games, I know Paul George can help you win more than that.
That's a 50-win team last year if you substitute Paul George and Tobias Harris. They probably win 50.
Yes.
That is a good point. So the books currently actually have the Sixers at 52 and a half. That's where I think I saw a 51 and a half, a bunch of 52 and a half, and a 53 and a half. So we'll say 52 and a half. I have them a little bit over that. I think 54 and 28 is very reasonable. And even with like excellent health, you could even see 57, 58 wins possibly. Just because, again, if things go right for this team, they're going to be hard to stop with their starting unit. Depth, concern, absolutely. But that first five, they're going to be running at people hard.
Yeah. I'm a little bit more cautiously pessimistic with it. I have 52. It's what I have like literally written down because I think if you're smart, like I said earlier, you sit and beat some games just to make sure you're not going to get a broken hand and then you're out for the first round, or Paul George is overexerted and he's not effective, so kind of takes away a couple games. But ultimately, your competition is right there is the Knicks and the Bucks. Those are them, and the obviously the Celtics are at the top, but those two and
I think the
even
Magic
the
are a sneaky
Magic.
team too. Yeah,
Yeah, with
Yeah.
KCP now, they're
Yeah.
going to be tough.
So it's kind of like
absolutely.
the Sixers finished seventh last year. I think they could slot right there into Milwaukee's role at third, even jump the Knicks because I'm not sold on the Knicks not upgrading at the center spot. Can't play Julius Randle as a small ball center. It's just not going to work. I don't care if you're Tom Thibodeau or not. It's just not going to work. So I give the Sixers the advantage. They finished second at 52.
Nice. I'm going to say 50, but they could, like you said, James, like there's a scenario in which they're in that 57 to 60 range, with health going the right way. And something interesting about the Knicks, too, like they have all this wing depth, But is OG Anunoby going to even play 50 games? As great as he is, he's always hurt. So that's another thing to think about. And the Bucks, I think their time is kind of up. Like they're going to be good because they have Giannis, but the Magic seem to be that to me that could be the sneaky team out there. But I think the Sixers are in that 2 to 4 range, but the Magic could really be sneaky because they've got a lot of talent. And adding KCP was huge. They finally got a defender and a shooter at the 2 guard position now.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Magic. What they've done. Maybe we will get to talk about that next week. That would be awesome. If there's anything else y'all want to talk about, let's get it in. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
Nah, go Sixers. Let's make the conference finals at minimum.
All right.
Yes,
well, this has been the Ahead of the Game podcast. Again, I have Coach Matt Miller and Pete Toal here with me talking about the 76ers. Like the channel or subscribe to the channel, like the video and share the video. Thank you and have an excellent day.